In the way that we, the majority of people, do love life in spite of much that is ugly or despairing, it is an easy conclusion to say that we definitely do not want an apocalypse. That desire to avoid the worst, however, may be insufficient to assuage our deep fears as we sense the presence of overwhelming tsunami type threats that spell doom. We need something to believe in, something bigger than ourselves to lift us up. If you have such a belief, good for you. That is meant sincerely, for having direction in life is half the battle. But not everyone is so fortunate. Doubt, indeed self doubt, is very much at play in our world. Whether you believe in something larger and external to yourself or not, there is likely some room for improvement for most of us in the area of self knowledge. As mentioned before, and as acknowledged with sympathy on this point, it is known that people are very often overly busy, and so time for self exploration is exceedingly difficult to find. And it is anticipated that as a listener or a reader, you might well accept the argument that balance or homeostasis of body and mind are necessary for peace of mind, which in turn allows the potential for insight to come knocking. You might even appreciate that because seeking balance and peace of mind is not the norm for a busy life, it could feel uncomfortable. It might even cause you to feel vulnerable. Further, you might even concede that a vulnerable condition can be useful, for within that discomfort, unlooked for ideas might suddenly emerge, the necessity being the mother of invention phenomena. That's all just wonderful, to speak with sarcasm. It sounds like everything ought to just fall into place. If only we did A, B, and C. Or we could say that seeking self knowledge would be like exchanging one opiate of self delusion for another. Exchange the materialist, happy, consumption driven life for a self convinced of our own destiny towards enlightenment life. Or something like that. It ain't easy to be genuine, especially in a world with so much cynicism and doubt. That is why what ought to be sought out for leadership should come from within. And so the splinter in the mind idea is so often evoked. Perhaps it is just a naive assumption that so many, probably the majority, have had that splinter in the mind nagging voice in some form or another at some time or another. There is the shadow of doubt. It can get hold of you and challenge convictions, for there is no proof for the idea of some universal nagging voice of conscience, or whatever it is. Maybe we can simply chalk it up to angst, especially in those teen years when so many teens judge the adults and the world that they are being left with. Surely something like a voice is saying to the teen mind, the world sucks, or look at the mess of things and how awful so many people are. It is a big question, without a clear answer, this inner voice business. We can say that our ideals and values inform that inner voice, in particular when we see what we perceive to be injustice. And reaction to injustice, and hence the voice, is often strongest when we and our ideals are still young, before cynicism has truly set in. We can ask questions. Well, where do these values and ideals come from? In part, they are informed by culture, and so those values and ideals may have particular flavoring that is culturally induced. Or we can go with a more scientific explanation that values and ideals and a sense of what is wrong is important for peace within a group or tribe. Local cooperation, then, has significant survival value. We can keep pushing the question, why does this internal dialogue laden with values exist with human beings more strongly, or at least in more complex ways? We can look to answers from science and evolution, or we can look to God and a religious explanation. As soon as you get to this point, you risk becoming mired in opposing or even polarizing views. When views on a thing are polarized in this way, it is usually a clue that there is no answer. But that is not what we hear, is it? No, you'll be given an answer, because neither side is willing to concede anything to the other. If you are in one camp or the other with vehemently held views, you are likely to feel contempt for the other side. Certainty on a question like this does not mean that an answer is possessed or that an ultimate truth is discovered. What we are really dealing with, where certainty is proclaimed, is actually pride. Pride is the oldest of all faults. Indeed, it is wrapped up in the concept of original sin, like a thing that we seemingly cannot avoid. Where there is pride, there is the belief that a truth is possessed. There is actually a trap for the prideful. It is very much like being mired in heavy mud that prevents any movement and may even drag you down, though you may not know it, because your pride blinds you to the reality that you are faltering. When you step back, if you even can, you can begin to see how childlike and perverse is certainty of belief in the face of an unanswerable question. If and when an individual does actually step back, there may be some level of discomfort and an experience of perceived vulnerability, but that too passes, and then there is liberation. The liberation is to be found in the renewed ability to question or to hold a question and be led by it. Such an experience is not just liberating, it is also humbling. It is humbling and liberating both because it stems from an actual admission and acceptance of a real truth. That is, that we do not know everything. Such an admission is also exciting for the mind that loves knowledge, for it means that there is more to learn. Such a mind that delights in this kind of love is actually aligning with the compulsion of that splinter in the voice type thing, that somehow inexplicably knew that something was missing. So what can we do about this, with this newly discovered avenue towards liberation of mind? For one, we can embrace the truth of a life centered around the concept of humility. This is not to suggest that we must admit a lack of knowledge about things in general. It is only when we encounter the big questions that have always compelled us at various times through our histories that we ought to be open and humble. In fact, when we have lost our humility, time and time again, we have gotten into trouble. We have lacked imagination and simply trotted out the same old comfortable and safe assumptions, desperately believing we had the answers. Humility is about setting aside the false prophets of the certain answers and the comfort opiate that comes with certainty. Humility is about the true leap of faith, that we do not know how we will land, but with being attentive to that inner voice, a landing of grace will be found that leaves one breathless. This sort of language that is being used in describing the central importance of humility may seem like it wanders into the territory of mysticism, where leaps of faith, grace, and breathlessness are hauled out as qualities of experience for the person on a journey. But such language is actually highly appropriate when pondering the big questions of existence. It is with the big question as it is for the explorer at sea that relies on the stars, especially the North Star, and its steadfast truth. We do not know for certain what lies over the horizon, but with the question, or the stars to guide us, we can have a faith at least that our course is true. In a way, it may seem counterintuitive, but there is more for us to find that can lead us with the unanswerable question. To go searching with such a question in mind, there is the requirement of the humility. The humble and open mind is much more apt to see the possibilities and try some different ideas on for size, as opposed to a mind that is certain about things. The humble mind that searches with the unanswerable question can also change course, because they are not beholden to a particular idea with a sense of loyalty. Most importantly, the humble mind accepts a certain level of creative and compelling fear, which contrasts markedly with the mind of certainty. It was mentioned earlier that pride is usually what is behind the argument of certainty. The desire to believe that we, and the people that we strongly identify with, are right. It is innately human and somewhat natural. It goes to a deep-seated, unconscious fear that we ought to trust the known, trust the tribe. And there has been a lot of historical and evolutionary value in that way of existing. The trouble occurs when we do not recognize that this dynamic, driven by fear and reinforced with pride, is actually at work within us. You see, it worked for so long, this tribally reinforced certainty, and so now we easily default to it, albeit that there are often multiple overlapping tribal loyalties. We see it in racial, cultural, and religious identities. We see it in nationalistic patriotism, in class identity, in corporate culture. We even see it in sport team fanaticism. In other words, wherever we look, we see this type of mindset at work. What we don't see is the mix of pride and fear that is behind our tribal certainty. We don't see this because we are not looking. Pride does that. You don't need to see anything differently when you know that you possess the right view. Now we are ready. To internalize even a modicum of this argument is to ask of oneself, where might I be guilty of some prideful belief that I possess the truth? And can I own up to the fear that is in part driving my prideful certainty? These are not easy questions to ask of oneself and be honest with, but that is how humility operates. It tears you down before you can be built back up. The reward for undergoing the ordeal of humility is the development of a real self, more able to think and see while at the same time being more gracious with others, as there is sympathy or empathy for what others might be going through as well. Such a human being is further along on the spectrum of self-realization, like those rare individuals you may have had the good fortune to encounter. Of course, this whole argument is made because it needs to be made. To the degree that there is awareness of the threats of future tsunamis, growing anxiety is understandable, especially when all you have to face the future with are your tried and true certain beliefs. Many such individuals cannot imagine that they would fail, that their core beliefs could be wrong, and so they are liable to fail utterly. It needn't be this way. Change will not be easy. It never is. And the changes required of us this time are monumental, but they are not insurmountable. Imagine for a moment, though, if we were to embrace change, if we were to discover what is innate within us, what a different world it would be. Human beings discovering a true liberation, an ability to think and ask questions that do not even occur to the mind that is filled with pride. And the rampant polarization of rigid views will also begin to fall away, as well as the various tribal loyalties, as we discover with greatly enhanced awareness how we are unified within the vast depth of our human potential. This potential itself becomes unlocked of necessity as we confront threats that unify humanity, in the sense that these big threats are global in reach and inescapable. That we need something to believe in, here it is. We have not yet met the human being that could be. We have only tried to imagine. We do not need final answers for the time being regarding our origins or our destiny. We need only to be aware that our present reality, with all of its various threats, is and will continue to be like a slate wiping phenomena that overwhelms our various old world views. To find a way to flourish in the world that follows will require the emergence of a new kind of human being, one that is comfortable living with a question that induces a renewed sense of humility. In other words, it is to find that which is best within us, which we knew was there all along, but which we have been hesitant, with some fear, to go and find. We need to believe in that human being, for that individual has untapped capacity to invent the future itself. Much of this episode focused on humility and its central importance for an individual that seeks knowledge. The obvious question is, am I a humble person? Even to answer in the affirmative is to sound like I am speaking from some pride. The qualifier may be how vigilant I remain regarding my own pride. How certain am I regarding what I think I know? And to what extent am I aware that I need to believe a thing out of some fear, because to not know is just, well, too scary. While you can never have absolute certainty that you are not self-deluded in some way, the most important area where you need to have humility is on the matters of the big, unanswerable questions. It certainly helps to not be a member of a particular group espousing a religious belief, or not to be immersed in some complete worldview kind of ideological thinking. In those cases, membership has its restraints on the mind. It also helps if you have lived with enough self-doubt and healthy skepticism without being debilitated by doubt. The bulk of my adult life, until recently, was spent seeking answers and having questions. That only changed to degree when I met a woman, fell in love, and had a child. I say that things only changed by a degree because I have been doing this thinking for so long, it has become ingrained in me. Another thing that helps to keep a person humble is doing a self-improvement practice. For me, that has been Tai Chi for about 25 years. Tai Chi, is an evolving practice wherein you learn a great deal about yourself. It also helps that I have been a teacher of the art for more than 15 years. With every new student that I have taught, there are different questions and different techniques to consider in order to get the ideas across. In this way, it is a privilege to teach because it keeps you on your toes. You end up rethinking techniques. It teaches you that there is never just one answer. And those are words to live by. See you next time.